The absolute worst prison is the one we erect in our own minds. And we live in a culture that's constantly trying to lock us into unhealthy ideas about who we are, what we're capable of, who we aren't. And I think that the more we mentally free ourselves individually, the more work we can do collectively. You know, we have to learn how to wrap our arms around our brothers and sisters. We have to have those conversations that are uncomfortable. We have to really think about how our actions impact other people.
That's Shaka Senghor, and this is the Rich Roll Podcast. The Rich Roll Podcast. Greetings, everybody. How you guys doing? What's happening? My name is Rich Roll. Welcome to my podcast. I got a great show for you guys today. I think it's an important show. It's a heavy show, very, very heavy. One I think is likely to haunt you, perhaps stick with you, make you think, but also hopefully inspire you. But before we dig in, let's get the business end of this thing done. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by my friends at Casper. Look, you guys know I talk a lot about sleep on the podcast. Why I sleep in a tent on my roof. It's true. I've been doing that for about a year. What do I have inside my tent? I have a twin Casper mattress and I love it. Sleep is super important to me and it should be for you guys too. You got to get a good night's rest and it shouldn't cost a fortune. That's why Casper pioneered an obsessively engineered mattress at a shockingly fair price. And I really do love these guys because they're gutting out all the middlemen, the resellers, the retailers, the showrooms, all the commission-driven, inflated pricing. And they're able to pass that savings on to you by selling online at a fraction of what it would cost in a store. The product is amazing. They've got an in-house team of engineers who have spent thousands of hours developing the Casper, and they continue to iterate on it to develop their mattress using feedback from nearly 500,000 customers. We got 3 at our house, in addition to the one I have in my tent. My kids sleep on them, and they're great. But the part that I really appreciate is that buying a Casper mattress is super easy. You order online. It's available in the US, Canada, and now the UK. It's delivered right to your door in a compact box. And the whole affair is completely risk-free because they offer this crazy free 100-night home trial complete with free delivery and free returns. Basically, you can sleep on the thing for 100 nights, and if you don't love it, they'll pick it up and refund you everything, no questions asked. Why do they do this? Because they understand the importance of truly sleeping on a mattress before you commit, especially considering you're going to spend a third of your life on it. And right now, I've got a special offer for the RRP tribe. Get $50 toward any mattress purchase by visiting casper.com/roll and using the promo code ROLL. Again, casper.com/roll. Use the promo code ROLL. Terms and conditions apply. Today's episode is also brought to you by Harry's. You know what I love as much as getting a great night's sleep? A great shave. It's been years now, people, since I've switched to using Harry's. And personally, I'd never go back to overpaying for razors that don't even give me the close shave and the comfortable glide like my Harry's razor does. Not to mention the whole local drugstore lockdown hassle thing. We don't need to even get into that. Harry's is all about a great shave at a fair price, which is why over 3 million guys have switched to Harry's. And it's all because these two ordinary guys, Jeff and Andy, that's the real names, they were just so fed up with getting ripped off that they decided to fix shaving themselves. You see, for decades, one big razor company has relentlessly increased prices and reaped immense profits at the expense of its customers. And these guys knew, Jeff and Andy knew, that the only way they could take less profit and still ensure quality was to buy their own blade factory. Of course, right? It's elementary. And then sell directly to you over the internet. So Harry's can offer their blades at half the price, just $2 a blade compared to the $4 or more you'll pay at the drugstore. And right now, Harry's is so confident you'll love their blades. They're giving you their trial set for free. All you got to do is cover shipping. That's about $3. Your free trial set includes a weighted ergonomic razor handle, 5 precision engineered blades with a lubricating strip and trimmer blade, rich lathering shave gel, very important, and a travel blade cover. That's a $13 value for you to try. So stop messing around and get started shaving with Harry's today by claiming your free trial offer, a $13 value for free. All you got to do is cover shipping. To get your free trial set, including a razor handle, 5-blade cartridge, and shave gel, go to harrys.com/roll right now. That's harrys.com/roll. All right, today's episode. So I want you to imagine yourself growing up around the wrong people, falling into a crowd you know you shouldn't be hanging out with. One thing leads to another, and then you're in deep. And like so many who find themselves in impossible circumstances, it's really not long before you find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then, without even thinking, impulsively, you do the wrong thing. The worst thing you can imagine. A thing that changes the trajectory of your life forever. A thing so unspeakably horrible, you dedicate the rest of your life to trying to atone for it. Well, this is the story of Shaka Senghor. In the summer of 1991, at the age of just 19, Shaka shot and killed a man, after which he spent 19 years in different prisons, 7 of which were spent in solitary confinement. And while he was inside, he made this decision, a decision to understand his past, to free his mind and expand his thinking. He read, he wrote, and ultimately he was able to pull himself out of the anger that led to his incarceration and prevented him from reaching his full potential. And when he was released in 2010, he didn't return to a life of crime. Instead, Shaka has done the remarkable, resurrecting his utterly broken life into a life of service, a life devoted to atonement, prison reform, nonviolent conflict resolution, community activism, literature, and really inspiring others to transcend their circumstances. This idea that our worst deeds don't define who we are, and nor do they prohibit our contribution to a better world. Now a leading voice in prison reform, Shaka is a powerful public speaker, a senior fellow with the Dream Corps, a 2014 TED Prize finalist, a former MIT Media Lab Directors Fellow, a former University of Michigan lecturer, a current fellow in the inaugural class of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation's Community Leadership Network, and the founder of the Atonement Project. In addition, he recently launched Mindblown Media, which is a new media company that aims to create high-impact content focused on the criminal justice system and mass incarceration. Shaka's memoir, Righting My Wrongs, Life, Death, and Redemption in an American Prison, debuted on the New York Times bestseller list as well as the Washington Post bestseller list. He's been interviewed by Oprah on her Super Soul Sunday program. And it's a conversation Oprah has called, quote, one of the best I've ever had, not just in my career, but in my life. His story touched my soul. Shaka's TED Talk received a standing ovation. It's been viewed more than 1.3 million times and was featured by TED as one of the most powerful TED Talks of 2014. That's linked in the show notes. You guys should definitely check that out. Shaka has appeared on CNN, CBS This Morning, The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, Good Day New York, and has been a guest on numerous radio programs, including NPR's All Things Considered and many, many more. He's also the recipient of numerous awards, including the 2016 Ebony Power 100, the 2016 Ford Man of Courage, the 2016 NAACP Great Expectations Award, the 2015 Manchester University Innovator of the Year, and the 2012 Black Male Engagement Leadership Award. That's a mouthful, right? That's quite a list coming from where he has come from. And I guess I want to leave you with this. I'm honored to share Shaka's extraordinary, powerful story with you guys today. Like I said, it's heavy, it's intense. It's a story about what it takes to truly turn your life around, to overcome abuse, horrible pain, victimhood, drugs, gun violence, and crime, and ultimately embody atonement, forgiveness, redemption, reform, gratitude, and service. So with that said, I give you Shaka Senghor. Shaka, man, so good to meet you and grab an opportunity to talk to you.
Likewise, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, I was with our mutual friend, Doug Evans, the other day. Doug, right? Juicero King. Yeah. And he's like, you got to talk to Shaka. So he hooked it up, man.
Oh, cool.
And I appreciate you carving out a slice of your day for me.
I appreciate you having me. Shout out to Doug.
Yeah, he's
Doug,
the man, right?
Yeah, Doug's a good guy.
And you're speaking at the Milking Conference coming up, right?
Yeah, in May. I think it's May the 1st. So I'm super excited about that. Sounds like an amazing lineup of people that'll be there. Yana Huffington, Deepak Chopra. So it's pretty cool people. So
yeah, my buddy Rip Esselstyn is speaking at that as well. I think Doug is attending. I don't think he's speaking, but
cool.
He was telling me about it, and it just sounds incredible. It
looks like a lot of amazing people going to be there. So I'm excited. I know Kareem Abdul-Jabbar going to be there. So that's just like, I'm a big basketball fan, and I don't really fan out over many people, but definitely somebody I would love to just meet. He's such a brilliant person outside of his, accomplishments on the court. I read one of his books when I was in jail, and it was just mind blowing. So
that's cool. You should share that from the podium when you're up there.
Yeah,
let them know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, your story is incredibly powerful, and it's inspiring. How you've been able to, take what has occurred in your life and transform not only yourself, but turn it into a powerful message that is transformative for others, man. And that's no small feat. And I'm really honored to be able to dig into it a little bit with you. And I think, kind of a good way to launch into it is to take a tip off, something I heard you say, which is, there's the story, of course, there's your story, but there's the story behind the story, and then there's the story behind that story, right? Yeah. And in order to really fully understand where you came from and what you've endured and how you've overcome it, you have to create context around that, right? You have to understand the syntax in which all of this occurred. So can you take us back a little bit, and maybe we'll just start at the beginning?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just think it's really important, especially in the day and age where everything is so immediately shoved in your face, right? Like, this person's a convicted murderer, this person robbed a bank, this person is just a horrible human being. And oftentimes we don't really understand how people arrive at the points in their life where they're at a crisis. And in my case, I grew up on the east side of Detroit in a neighborhood that was, a nice middle-class, working-class neighborhood. Back then, we were like the first black family on the block and had some amazing neighbors, though. It was just like a really interesting mix, Italian neighbors and Irish, and just the way that we engaged each other as a community was really special in that regard. But what was happening on the side of my household is something that happens all too often in a lot of households, where my mother was really abusive toward her children, and in a physical way or just an emotional physically,
way?
Emotional, verbally. She had a trifecta of abuse, and when you're going through it, you don't even realize it's abuse, because this is what I grew up with it. I have older siblings who I witnessed her abuse, and my father was complicit in that, because it wasn't just her.
He's a military guy, right?
Yeah, so my father was in the Air Force, and he also worked for the state. But my father was, like the typical working father back then. It was when he's going to work, we're in school. When he's coming home, we're asleep. So I'm not sure to what degree he understood all of what was happening, because we wasn't articulating that. But he was complicit in the sense that, there were times when it was very evident what was happening, and he didn't do anything to stop it. And that happens in a lot of households as well, where one parent may be more abusive than the other, or another parent may become part of the conspiracy to hide the abuse.
On some level, he had to know, though, what's going on in his house.
I know he knew it at some level, but to what level, is the different thing. But, hindsight being what it is, like you said, the story behind the story behind the story. What I learned about my mother is that my mother had grew up in this cycle of abuse, from, how she was raised to her first marriage. And so I believe hurt people. And, of course, I didn't have that knowledge as a kid when I'm being beat and slapped around, etc. But as an adult, that's one of the things that made it easy for me to forgive her, is because I understood she was just repeating the cycle, as oftentimes is the case.
How's your relationship with her now?
We're good. I actually talked to her the day before yesterday, and, we're always cordial. One of the things I realized is that we'll never have that father-son, mother-son relationship. It's unfortunate, because I look at how my son's mother is in terms of how she nurtures and cares for him, and just other friends who have great relationships with their mother, where whenever things happen in their life, that's the first person that they go share that with. So we don't have that, but we're definitely cordial and respectful to each other, and she's still my mother at the end of the day.
Yeah, it had to be a little rough for her to read Righting My Wrongs.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some moments with the book coming out, with the interview I did with Oprah that talked about some of her less than stellar moments, but what I did is I sat her down and I talked to her, and I was like, when I was writing this book, it was by far the most difficult book I've had to write, because I knew I was going to be highlighting unsavory moments about my mother, my father, but I explained to her, I was like, in the midst of this, I'm sharing my most shameful and traumatic moment, and what I was convicted of is far more serious than, what happened to me. And so once I was able to give her that context, she looked at it a little differently. And like I explained to her, like, my responsibility is to the young men and women who I mentor, but also to the people in the community who are oftentimes judging people based on a singular act without really taking the time to understand, how do we arrive at this point? And if in order to fix something, you have to know the root causes of it.
And the book is only as powerful as you are willing to be open and honest about everything in all its, sort of unsavory detail.
Yeah, I mean, the book wouldn't have any relevance if it was just kind of like a basic overview of the experience, and we live in a country where gun violence is rampant, where violence itself is rampant. Right now they're dealing with an issue where a guy in Cleveland, he decided to Facebook Live or something. And
I know that happened just a couple days ago.
Shoot this older gentleman. And people were just like so desensitized to what's happening. And it's such a rush to judgment of, oh, hey, we should execute him on sight, do this and do that. And I'm a little bit more hesitant in terms of, my reaction to it. I mean, as a man with a father who I love and care about, and just as a person who understands the devastating impact that gun violence has on families, I have an emotional reaction as well, but also have a broader context, to look at. And so I just think we're living in some rough times right now when we're dealing with these type of issues.
Yeah, it's pretty insane right now. Everything seems to be going in the wrong direction at the moment.
Yeah.
All right, so you're a kid. You're growing up in sort of under the umbrella of your mom in this abusive situation that I presume gets normalized to some extent because that's all right? Like, so you're just you're going to school and trying to do the best you can, and you're what, like 10, 12 at this point?
Yeah, and I mean, like, it's normalized in some ways, but it's deeply hurtful and painful. And I just remember how I began to shrink, the older I got. Just in terms of my personality and being outgoing and being just this kid who is so full of excitement in life and as all kids are when they first start off. And by the time I was like 14, I was like, I had enough. And I decided to run away. And I was so naive about the world that I was about to enter. I had older siblings and, we all grew up, like at that point, by the time I turned 14, our neighborhood had changed dramatically. It went from this, this real community, this sense of community, to crack was entering the neighborhood and people were moving out. We was dealing with white flight and factories closing, this is Detroit, so this is the Rust Belt. So I had an understanding to some degree of what happens outside of, my household and my neighborhood, but I was nowhere near being prepared, and I don't think any kid can be prepared to enter this adult subculture of drug trafficking.
Yeah, and all of that is outside your control. That's going on sort of socially in your community. Like when you were talking about that, it reminded me of the OJ documentary Made in America, and how they did such a phenomenal job of creating the story behind the story and the context for how all of that unfolded, because you can't understand it unless you understand the history of the LAPD and the history of race in Los Angeles in its fullest context from the beginning, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at a lot of the stuff that's happening, you know, that documentary, and I haven't seen the full documentary, but I've heard just
it's like 8 hours.
Incredible.
It's amazing. You got to watch the whole thing.
Yeah, I definitely look forward to it. But, you know, being able to put everything in the context is so important. You know, when I ran away, crack was just entering Detroit. Mm-hmm. So it's still considered a party drug. It was still, you know, the clientele was doctors and lawyers and teachers and, you know, people who had respect in the community, but that diminished so quickly. Mm-hmm. And I was sucked in right during that time. So I went in, this innocent, naive kid, nowhere to go, homeless, no way to feed myself, and basically older, more seasoned street hustler preyed upon me the way that, you know, many kids are preyed upon in our community. Like, we talk about human trafficking a lot, and most of the times what's attached to human trafficking is, you know, young ladies being prostituted out and being taken advantage of, you know, in the sex industry. But one of the things we don't really think about is how kids are trafficked within drug culture and how they're seduced into this culture. They're promised this whole other world, and then once you're tricked into it, it's almost like you can't escape it. Mm-hmm. And so that was the world that I was in 1986. Yeah,
that's amazing. I've never thought of that. I mean, that's so true. I never thought of it in the context of human trafficking, though. But yeah, obviously the case. I mean, so you basically you run away from home at like 14, right? Like, you just had enough and decided, you know, what was the plan? Like, did you think it through at all, or are you just going to find a friend's couch to crash on, or because at the time you were like, just again to create context, and sorry to interrupt, but you were a good kid. I mean, you're doing well in school, you're getting good grades, like, you know, everything is sort of going in the right direction in terms of, like, you know, sort of the trajectory, you know, at least academically in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I was so naive. There was no real plan other than to get away from the pain. Mm-hmm. And when you're operating out of that emotional cloud, it's hard to see things clearly, and especially when you're 14 years old. And especially a 14-year-old back then. Like, 14-year-olds today are a lot more advanced because they have so much access to the world through social media and, you know, the different gadgets and things like that. But back then, you know, I just thought that somebody would see this, you know, this smart little handsome kid and say, I'll take care of him, you know, and I'll wrap him in the love and nourishment that all children deserve. And unfortunately, that just wasn't the reality. The first couple of weeks, I was sleeping in garages and basements and, you know, abandoned, you know, places where, you know, we turned into clubhouses. You know, my friends, they would smuggle me food, or we would go up to the local grocery store and hustle and do whatever we could. And it was in that vulnerable space that, you know,
you get recruited
into this culture.
And what's the initial pitch?
The initial pitch is that, you know, you'll make a lot of money. You'll be able to, you know, feed yourself. You'll have somewhere to stay. You'll be able to dress nicely. And when you haven't showered in a couple of weeks and you have on the same tattered clothes and you're hungry because the only thing you've been eating is chips and cookies and pops, like, it's very appealing, you know. And the first day into the culture, you know, it took me to Burger King, which was a big thing back then. You know, like, kids wasn't going to Burger King regularly and being able to order everything on the menu. And literally that's what I did. And so it's basically a form of manipulation, where you're really manipulating a person into the culture, and you're giving them this big introduction, you know, because you know what works for kids, you know, Burger King and whatever kind of cereal they like to eat, you know, and new gym shoes and clothes. And so that's kind of how it was. Like, the first week, I had never felt that taken care of, you know, by anybody, you know. Went shopping and, like, just go in and get whatever you want, and, you know, going to the grocery store and, you know, get you something for the house or whatever, you know.
And it's hard to say no to that.
Yeah, you know, so. And
is your mom trying to find you, or, like, how does that play out?
You know what? I don't. To this day, I don't know. I don't think so. You know, my mother. You know, again, I'm the fourth of 6 children, so I had older siblings who had ran away before. And, you know, I used to hear her say, I'm not going out there looking for them. They'll bring their butt back home whenever they're ready, you know. Or police bring them home, or they'll find them in the morgue. Like, so she really wasn't the type that was like, oh my God, my child is missing.
Right.
Let's put him on a milk carton, you know?
Yeah.
It's really like, okay, well, you don't want to abide by the rules.
So you get plugged into this system, right?
Yeah.
There's probably a bunch of other kids your age doing the same thing, like the whole culture around it. Yeah. And you're getting taken care of, right? You're making some cash.
Yeah, so the culture was full of young guys. Like, all of us were, 14, 13, 15 years old. Mm-hmm. The guys who was actually running the show, they were a little older. Even now when I look back, like, the guy that I first started selling drugs for, he seemed so much older than he actually was. Now looking back, he was like maybe 20, 22,
right.
No older than 22. And to a 14-year-old, that's like a grown man, But now looking back, I'm like, he was still a kid in a lot of ways, But it's a very youth-driven culture, and especially even with the drug laws back then, the dealers were always trying to figure out ways to get around the severity of the drug laws, and by using young kids, like with the telling them that they wouldn't get real time, they would just go to juvie and be back out,
right.
Which wasn't true, by the way, because you can get charged as an adult. There's a guy out of Detroit named White Boy Rick who's been in prison almost 30 years now, or maybe longer than that, who was part of this culture at 17. He's been in prison ever since. So, a lot of manipulation in that culture.
So to paint like a visual of, what that experience was like for you, like my only frame of reference is, ironically, like I'm from Grosse Pointe.
Oh,
like,
cool.
We moved to DC when I was a kid, but it's funny because like we're sitting here together. My life experience, like growing up, couldn't have been more different from you. Yeah. And I'm a little bit older than you, but not much. But I'm just thinking, like, I was just on the other side of town, like when a lot of this was going on, and had no connection to it whatsoever. But in terms of like trying to understand visually like what this looked like, my only frame of reference is like watching The Wire. When I see kind of how that operation unfolded, is that like like when you watch something like that, is that an accurate portrayal of what you think it was like?
Yeah, I remember when I got out of prison, everybody was like, "You got to check out The Wire. You got to see this show, right?" And when I watched it, I was like, "Wow, this is such a adequate representation of the experience in a lot of ways." I mean, obviously the geography is a little bit different, but the system of it,
right.
The young kids, the young runners, the abuse that they were experiencing, the beatings when they messed up money, the shootouts, the beatings by the cops, like that was our everyday life. Mm-hmm. My first 6 months in, I experienced all the horrors that come with the culture. One of my childhood friends was murdered in front of a crack house. My older brother was shot. And then I was robbed at gunpoint. And I remember being robbed at gunpoint. Like, that was the closest I ever came to running home, because this was like probably within the first couple of weeks. And these guys robbed me. It was actually not far from Grosse Pointe. It was literally like right on the other side of Jefferson. So for people who don't know Detroit, Jefferson is a major street that separates one of the suburbs from the inner city. I remember being robbed in this crack house. It was Jefferson and Chalmers. And these guys who robbed me, one of them, he was a crack addict, but he was also a heroin addict. And I just remember him, having this arm around my neck and these pus-filled hands. And for anybody who's ever saw what heroin does, when you inject heroin, it causes your feet and your hands to swell up. And just, I remember him, just the smell, it was like cheap wine and pus and just sweat and, desperation. And I remember thinking, like, man, he's going to shoot me in the back of the head and kick me down these stairs, And
for that, like a couple bucks or whatever you happen to have.
For no more than $1,000 between drugs and money. And in that moment, that's when the shift began from being this innocent kid to, toughening up and becoming street savvy and street smart and not trusting people and being very cynical and reactionary, So
at the same time, though, there's a there's like a code and it becomes your family, right? So, it's like, because I'm imagining somebody listening to this thinking, well, why didn't you get out then? Like, you know what I mean? But that's not really, an option. Yeah, I suppose it is, but harder than one might think.
Yeah, it's not an option for a couple of reasons. For one, once you've been on the inside of an operation, to just arbitrarily decide to step outside of it puts you in as an immediate threat, because you can be a snitch, you can be a informant because you know everything. You can be the person that sets somebody else up to get robbed. So there's all those things that come with it. In that moment when I got robbed, it was like I can't go back and tell them that I'm scared to die, because in the hood, nobody's scared to die. Outwardly,
you can't show fear.
Can't show that in the hood.
Yeah.
And so it's all these different things working on a very young mind and a very traumatized mind, in that moment.
Mm-hmm. So the next kind of big thing that happens is when you get in an altercation and you end up getting shot. Like when you're like 18 or 19 at
17,
that point.
I was 17.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, a few years later, I was on the west side of Detroit, in the neighborhood called Brightmore, where I, sold drugs at, and I had got arrested and went to juvenile. It was like the last time that I was in juvenile, because they told me, I actually was 16 when I got arrested, went to juvenile and turned 17, and they was like, next time you'll be in the county jail, because we'll charge you as an adult. But anyway, when I came home, the girl I was seeing prior to, the woman I was seeing, actually she was a grown woman, I was seeing prior to me going in, her and I had like a minor conflict over some broken promises and things of that nature. And when she went and told her boyfriend, he came through. I thought it was going to be like an old school fist fight or something. I didn't even know this guy. And instead, he turned around and shot me multiple times. Twice in my leg, once in my foot. I still had a bullet in my foot. And when I went to the hospital, because the ambulance never came, my friend actually took me to the hospital. When I went to the hospital...
And the ambulance doesn't come because they just don't go to that part of town.
Yeah. I mean, they'll eventually get there. It's just, you might be dead by the time they get there, or, dealing with some other issues. So we felt the ambulance would take, we didn't, to our knowledge, the ambulance never even came. But we waited a while for the ambulance to come, and it never came. So my friend took me to the hospital, dropped me off. And basically they pulled bullets out of my legs, patched me up, gave me a prescription for some antibiotics and some pain pills, and literally I was back home within like a couple of days. And it was like no counselor stepped in to say, hey, how are you feeling? What are you thinking? No psychologist, psychiatrist.
Yeah, like how are you living your life right now? How about that?
Yeah, you know. And so at this point I was 17 years old, so I went back to my neighborhood with all these emotions, what I call this volatile cocktail of emotions. Anger, paranoia, fear, and I began to carry a gun every day. And it wasn't like the first time I had carried a gun, but it became very prominent part of my life in terms of just how I thought about life. I didn't feel safe without having a gun either on me or nearby. One of my friends had one, and it was just different. Like standing on the corner no longer was the same. And I wasn't the first of my guys to get shot, but it's one of those things where when your friend gets shot and they don't articulate what their experience or feeling, you just look at it like it's just, this happens in the hood. But once it happens to you and you realize how fragile life is and how in a wink of an eye your life can be gone, it just shifts your, way of thinking. And
you're a ticking time bomb. I mean, it's all, with that, like, post-traumatic stress, that trauma going, unaddressed, undealt with, it's only a matter of time before you're gonna act out and something's gonna go sideways.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the violence throughout the country, when you think about the gun violence in cities like Detroit and Chicago. I mean, Detroit averaging probably a murder a day. Chicago maybe 2 murders a day. When you think about these communities, you realize that PTSD has impacted the community tremendously. Even though we don't like to talk about it, like, mental health professionals won't really say that this is a real thing happening in the hood, sadly, but it is. You can't grow up in that type of gun violence and not be impacted by it in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And for me, what happened was, after I got shot, I began to run this narrative in my head that if I found myself in a conflict, I would shoot first. And 16 months later, that's what happened.
Yeah. And during this, and we're working up to that, but during this time, like, are you like tapping into the stash? Like, are you using it all, or are you staying away? Are you seeing like the damage, like, you just described, the crack and cocaine, or a crack and heroin addicted dude? Like, are you scared off by that, or are you partaking?
No, at that point, by the time I was 17, I had a great understanding of what happens when you use drugs, because when I was first into the culture, probably my first 6 months in, I became addicted to crack cocaine.
Oh, you did?
Like lace joints, and I was fortunate to be able to like just go cold turkey, and the thing is, it was for a very superficial reason. What I realized that, even though I was making a lot of money, I was basically smoking it all up, and so I couldn't dress the way that I wanted to dress, but I also ended up almost getting beat to death for messing up, a dealer's money. And I just remember being in this cold bathroom floor and just like, wow, like what kind of world do we live in where this happens to kids, without even thinking about my role in it, which was I smoked up all the drugs and all the profit. And so by the time I was 17, and it didn't take me long to break the addiction. Like, I broke the addiction, I just went cold turkey. But yeah, by the time I was 17, I had a full understanding of the ramifications. And the drug trade looked very different, because the clientele who, when we first started, was, still attractive women who were, working in professional fields. The drugs had taken an impact on their lives where they've lost everything. And, fathers who at once were part of the household were no longer a household because they were addicted and they were spending up all of the household money on drugs. So I saw the way that drug devastated our community and destabilized it.
And did you have contact with, the guys way up the food chain in the organization, the guys sitting at the top who are making the decisions?
So never the guys sitting at the top. To this day, I don't know. There's a lot of different like high level drug organizations then, but I had pretty great access up the food chain.
Yeah. And are you looking at those guys like that's how I want to roll someday? Like, are you thinking like you have aspirations of like moving up the ladder?
You know what? I had aspirations to make money. It was never really about status in that space in terms of like, I rose through the ranks relatively quickly because I was a smart kid. So there were things that I thought of that the average guy just wasn't thinking of in terms of how do you run a drug house, in a way that's efficient and that basically decreases the probability of police randomly riding down the street and seeing that trafficking is happening. So I had a lot of those skill sets, and I was rewarded for having those skill sets. But I never had ambitions to be the kingpin.
Right.
I couldn't even think about what that was at 14. It was just like, I want to make money, I want to dress nice, and I want to have pretty girls.
So the vision is sort of just what's right in front of you today, getting through the week or whatever. Yeah. All right, so you're walking around with all this post-traumatic stress, you're packing some heat, and it's just, you're dynamite waiting to be lit up, right?
Yeah, it's the thing, like, when I see young men in the neighborhoods now, because I'm always in neighborhoods, like, I think that's really important. I just moved out here, so I'm still navigating my way through it. But when I'm home or when I'm in the neighborhood and I see these young guys and I see this kind of glossy-eyed stare that they have, and they're just trying to get through the moment, and they're wearing this mask of toughness, like, I realized that was me, that I am them and they are me, and this is why I do the work that I do.
Yeah, you can identify completely with that experience. So you find yourself in another altercation, and this time it's, shoot first, ask questions later, be the first guy to pull, right?
Yeah, so in July of 1991, roughly about 16 months after I was shot, I was DJing a party around the corner from where I lived, and somebody got shot in front of the party. And we got various different reports of who had been shot, who had been hit. And what we discovered is that one of the conflicts involved one of the guys from our neighborhood, a guy we hung out with. But we didn't know to what extent anybody was hurt, harmed, or whatever. And we didn't know if it was like a beef going on, somebody's going to come back and shoot at the party. So we all left the party with that energy of somebody just having been shot. We don't know what's going on. And I remember when I got to my street, a car rolled up. It was actually a truck rolled up. And, excuse me, I'll repeat that part.
It's all right.
I remember going to my street and, a truck rolled up and, somebody asked for directions. And so even in that moment, I was just like on edge, because it's almost 2 a.m. A lot has happened, I've been drinking, we all have been drinking and partying. And then another car pulls up, and it was a guy in the car who bought drugs from us frequently, and he was what we consider a good customer. And a good customer is somebody who comes through and spends, anything over $40, $50 a pop. And so he's also what we call a runner. So in addition to him consuming crack cocaine, he also came and got the drugs for other people. Mm-hmm. So it can vary, sometimes they come maybe $30 or $40, but then sometimes it comes $300 or $400. So when he came this night, he had a whole bunch of money, like just literally in his hand. And he was like, he wanted to make a considerable, transaction, but I'm like, I don't do this from my house. And you bring in 2 guys, I don't know, like, who are these guys? And so we got into this conversation that quickly, escalated into an argument. And that argument went from us arguing back and forth about them leaving to threats being exchanged. And I turned to go in the house. And in that moment, I heard what I thought was somebody opening the car door. And that's when I turned and fired what turned out to be several fatal shots, tragically ending the man's life. And the man whose life that I'm responsible for taking, like, he wasn't even a drug user. I didn't know this then, but I know it now. He wasn't a drug user. He was intoxicated that night, but he wasn't a drug user. And basically, he was just trying to be a friend to a man who had a serious addiction to crack cocaine.
So open and shut case. How long before the cops show up, and you're in the back of the patrol car? So
I got arrested. I think I got arrested like a day later. I got turned in, so I got arrested like a day later.
Yeah. And in that moment, are you thinking like it's done, like I'm over with, or are you thinking I'll be back out soon? Like, what was your awareness level of like what the future was going to hold for you?
In that moment, I think I knew that it was really over. I didn't want to accept it mentally. I thought about different ways I can beat the case. Just being young and stupid, you're like, oh well, maybe if there's no witnesses, I can beat the case, et cetera, et cetera. They had conflicting statements, so I'm just thinking all of the most optimum possible outcomes, and
the perspective on the fact that you like took a guy's life. Like, what was your sort of thinking and awareness around that at that time?
In that moment, I knew that I had done something horrible, and once I got arrested, like, it really shifted from understanding that to fighting for freedom. It was just like, even the way the system is set up, which I really, it makes me, feel empathy and compassion for victims, because they don't really give the victims of any of these crimes an opportunity to really engage or to really hear from the person and to really sit down and talk to the person who's responsible for so much.
No, it's the opposite
pain,
of that,
right?
actually.
Yeah. And so when it came, I was charged with open murder. I ended up being sentenced to 17 to 40 years, a total of 17 to 40 years for second-degree murder.
And so explain what that means.
So that means that at a minimum, I would serve 17 years, and I was guaranteed 40 years if I didn't get paroled. So it's a 40-year sentence.
All right. So if you're in there and you're not acting, you're not like a solid citizen, you're looking at 40 years.
Yeah, I mean, the more
you have
you
a
act out,
fickle parole board?
the more time is added to your sentence. And even back then, like, they had good times. So if I would have just went in and been a model guy inside, I would have been out of prison in about 13 years. But I wasn't. Like, I went to prison. I was bitter. I was angry. Was frustrated. I found myself getting more and more trouble. Accumulated a total of about 25 misconducts my first 5 years in. Was sent up to maximum security my first year in. I was in solitary confinement my first year in. I got out, went back again. So I wasn't like a model person by any stretch of the imagination.
But going in, it's that thing of, I got to survive here. So I'm either going to get bent over or I'm going to be the guy who's, making the rules, right? You got to establish yourself when you're walking in, what kind of character you're going to be in that environment, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's you walk in, you're making a choice between being a lion or a lamb, and it's a young testosterone-driven environment, very volatile, stabbings happening on the yard every day, somebody's getting shanked, somebody's getting hit in the head with something, fights breaking out over the smallest thing. The prison I was at was called the Gladiator School, and it was because that's how many stabbings it was daily in the environment. And so, I walked in with the mentality that I got to survive and I'm going to be a lion, I'm not going to be a lamb. And so,
what's the first thing you did to kind of establish that when you got in?
Oh man, I got a lot of stuff. I would say it actually even preceded me going to prison. It's probably when I was in the county jail and I got into a fight with a few guys. It turned into kind of like a brawl type situation. And it was like 2 against 3, and it was 2 of us primarily against 3 other guys, and we got the best of them. And so that kind of, carried over to
the word
prison.
goes out.
Like, and so then when I got there, I also had people in prison that I knew, that I grew up with. And, they knew me from the streets and knew my reputation in the streets. So a lot of it kind of worked out. But, I've done a lot of different stuff. I don't want to give all the jewels away. I really want people to buy the book because I think they'll get a clearer perspective of why things happen and how they happen.
Right. So you get in, you're establishing, you're going to be a lion. You're getting in all kinds of scuffs and trouble. And then, this sort of, I want to talk about the solitary confinement aspect of it because it's so, unbelievably intense. Over the course of you were in for 19 years, yeah?
Yeah, so I did a total of 19 years. I actually had, I entered prison with all this energy, this anger and bitterness, and I got into a lot of trouble. I got into a lot of conflicts. I got into a lot of conflicts with administration. And 8 years into my sentence, I got into a serious conflict with an officer. And at this point in my incarceration, things had just started to look up. I had my security reduced. I had less than 10 years on my sentence, so I was on the other side of the hard part of the sentence, and I got into this conflict with this officer who was very obnoxious, very abusive of his authority. We had got into it like the prior week over a policy related to me going to the yard, etc. And the week after that initial interaction, we got into another conflict about me being able to use the bathroom. And that conflict escalated when he literally pushed me back into the bathroom when I tried to exit it. And then I ended up beating him up real bad. And to the point where he had to have surgery in front of the unit. He had to have a tracheo performed in front of the unit. And so they took me to solitary confinement. They charged me with assault on an officer, sentenced me to an additional 2 years in prison, and determined the amount of time in solitary confinement. But that turned out to be 4.5 years straight, 23-hour lockdown, 5 days a week, 24-hour lockdown, other 2 days a week, 3 10-minute showers a week. And then the recreation was to go outside to like a dog kennel.
Right.
So that was my world for 4.5 years straight. And
had you been in solitary prior to that incident for shorter stints, or was that the first time that you were being introduced to that world?
No, for the first few years of my incarceration, I did about 3 years in solitary.
Yeah.
So I had been in solitary for assault on the inmate, assault on staff, couple of times. And then that was my third trip.
And when they put you in solitary, it's for an indeterminate amount of time, right? Like part of the head game is they don't tell you how long you're going to be in there. The idea is to kind of break you and kind of crush, any idea of hope.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the control mechanism that they use, and in addition to a few other things. But when I look back on that experience, to me, that's probably one of the most torturous parts of being in solitary. Is not knowing when or if you'll ever get out. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I was in there with guys who were in solitary for 20 years, and originally I thought I would be in for maybe a couple of years and they'll let me out, but I ended up being there for 4.5 years straight. And it was unlike anything I experienced the first time I went solitary.
So when you're in there, can you communicate with the people in the cells nearby? Like, is it noisy, or like what is the actual physical experience of being in that cell?
Solitary is probably the noisiest part of the prison experience because the mental illness level in there is astronomical. And so you have at any given time several guys beating on doors, big steel doors, taking their brush and just beating it on the steel sink, which basically echoes all through the chamber. Officers barking orders, coming in with the goon squad, pepper spraying, men and subduing them to the bed by shackling them to the bed. So it's a very loud environment. Excuse me.
That's all right.
It's a very loud environment, and the environment forces you to figure out different ways to communicate. And so a couple of the things we would do is either we would lay on the floor and just talk beneath the door, because that carried a little bit further. Uh-huh. So sometimes, whenever I was fortunate, I had a couple of times I was fortunate to have at least a decent enough neighbor across from me that I can lay on the floor and just converse with about random stuff. But that was rare. Most of the guys around me had mental illness. Mm-hmm. Another thing we would do is we would take a loose the electrical socket. And if you take that loose, then you can talk to people downstairs in the cell beneath you. And so it's kind of like our telephone
like through the
system.
Ducts. Yeah.
Yeah. And some guys, they would talk through their toilets. They would literally take all the water out their toilets, and it allowed them to talk to guys in other cells.
Wow. Well, I think, again, I want to explore how you, mentally and emotionally weathered that experience. But in order to kind of understand that, I think, we got to go to the story behind the story or create a little more additional context. Mm-hmm. And by that, I mean, kind of talking about when you sort of started to, think about your life and the potential for what lay before you in a new way, in terms of sort of resigning yourself to being a product of the system versus taking more responsibility for your path and kind of investing in yourself, right? Because there was a transition period or a switch in your consciousness about how you were going to get through this experience and what you wanted your life to be like when you got out. So where did that begin, and how did that start to manifest in your daily experience?
Yeah, for me, it actually started earlier in my incarceration than I had originally thought about or had given credit to. But it started with having amazing mentors. And these were guys who are serving life sentences. Some of them have died. Some of them will be dying soon. And, most will die in prison because they all have life sentences with no parole. But they saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. They saw leadership qualities and redemptive qualities that I didn't even see. And so initially it started with them just, other officers would be like, can you talk to this young guy? Because I was very disobedient, very insolent toward officers. And they would talk to me and just try to, talk me down, talk me off the edge, so to speak. And so what they did is, because I was very adamant about not listening to them, I just knew my life was over. I was like, I'm going to die in prison. They was like, you're not going to die in prison. Like, you got numbers. And I'm like, at 19, I couldn't see 2 decades down the line. I could barely see 2 weeks down the line. So, but what they realized that I like to read. And so they started giving me books and challenging my thinking and challenging my ideas. And one of the most powerful books they gave me was Malcolm X's autobiography, because it became a model for what's possible, that, you know, if you do the right things, you can turn your life around. The second big thing that happened to me was I got a letter from a woman who said that she had raised a man whose life I was responsible for taking. So this woman who said she raised a man whose life I'm responsible for taking reached out to me with this powerful letter about forgiveness and love. And, you know, she humanized, you know, him in a way that I hadn't had exposure to when I was in court. And that penetrated like my heart, you know. It wasn't a fix, you know, it wasn't like a quick magic pill to make everything go away, but it definitely pricked that heart space. So the mentors, they had reached me on a, you know, mental, cerebral level. Like they had got to me, but then she got to me on an emotional and spiritual level. And the final thing was getting a letter from my son while I was in solitary confinement, after his mother told him why I was in prison. And like, at that point, I was like, you know, I need to figure out what to do with my life in a way that honors my responsibility as a father to my son. And I realized I was tired of hurting myself, because my decisions was hurting not only the people who I victimized, but it was also hurting me. And I just challenged myself and was like, you know, if you're going to turn this thing around, here's what you need to do. You know, you need to make a commitment, and you need to commit to yourself and convince yourself that you're ready this time. Because I had told myself, oh, I'll never get in trouble again. I'll never go through this again. And then once I was out of the immediate tornado of that trouble, it's like, okay, back to the same thing. And so this time, I just was like, you know, you need to figure it out. So I started journaling, you know, initially, and that led to me writing books while I was in solitary. So those were some of the coping mechanisms. Other things was just reading, being literate. I was fortunate, you know, the average reading level in prison is 3rd grade. So I was fortunate to come in, you know, with a higher reading level and a great comprehensive level. So I was able to take these books in and read them. And, you know, from political science to philosophy, those books began to shape me into the man I am today. But writing, which I believe is meditation on paper, was probably the most impactful for me.
So when you're in solitary, you can get books.
Yeah, solitary, you can order books from the library, which typically are never really available, but you can also buy books. If you have money on your, you know, in your commissary, you can buy books. You can order them from different vendors. Now it's extremely hard to get books in prison because you almost have to order everything from Amazon. And so,
is that true? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No.
They used to let you order from the publisher or from a local bookstore, but now it's just like Amazon.
What's up with the library? Doesn't every prison have a library?
Every prison has every prison has a legal library. They're legally bound to have a law library. And most prisons have some sort of library. And the type of literature that's there it varies from prison to prison.
Right. Can you share the words that your son shared with you in that letter?
Yeah, in the letter, which is contained in the book, my son just said, you know, "Dear Dad, my mom told me while you're in prison for murder, Dad, don't kill again. Jesus, watch what you do. It's a sin." And you know, I'm not a religious person. I'm very spiritual, but I'm not religious. But hearing those words come from my child, you know, definitely would be one of those things that I describe as like a spiritual moment. You know, it's very emotional, but it was a spiritual moment that really grounded me, because for the first time I was seeing through my son's eyes how he could possibly grow up to see me as this monster. And I just knew I couldn't lead this world without showing him an example of what a father is, what a man is.
Yeah. And also, you know, having that understanding of the cycle of trauma that you were the victim of through your mom, and on some level, I would imagine an awareness that you're perpetuating that cycle by, you know, becoming this person that your son, you know, is going to sort of look to for the rest of his life as being this human being that perhaps is going to catalyze a similar path in his own life.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't want to have a negative influence on my son. Yeah. And I mean, I saw enough of that where, I mean, 70% of children with an incarcerated parent end up in some form of incarceration. And I've seen, like, when you're the popular gal, you have that reputation in the neighborhood, and your child, this is all they hear is just, oh yeah, your father was this, or he shot this person, he shot that. They can grow up to possibly emulate that. And
That's the model.
I definitely didn't want him to emulate the path that I had taken. So once I started writing and started journaling, I also would just send him different stuff that I hope would inspire him to take a different path.
Mm-hmm. And how powerful, that the woman, the godmother of the victim, to forgive you. I mean, that's just, what a gift to be able to, free up that emotional, spiritual space within yourself that allowed you to kind of flip that mirror a little bit and see yourself in a different way. I mean, without that, I don't see it, I don't see it going in a positive direction. It seems like that was a, crucial aspect in what triggered you to, move in a new direction.
That letter is such a profound letter. It's one of the reasons I added it to the book at the end, because I really wanted people to understand, like, what forgiveness looks like. What does that process look like? Forgiveness is an individual choice, but her letter was just so powerful. And even though, I said I'm not a religious person, her commitment to her faith and the ideas of what she believed to be right led her to write that letter. And I just found that to be amazing and powerful experience.
Have you gone in and seen her?
I haven't yet. She's an elder now. I think she's in Florida. And I just haven't had an opportunity to meet with her in person. So
beyond the Malcolm X autobiography, what were the other books that were instrumental for you?
I would say Donald Goines' whole series. Donald Goines was a writer out of Detroit. He wrote some of the grittiest, socio-political novels that, I've ever read. He wasn't like this brilliant, fancy literature writer, but he was a very honest, very raw, and very vivid writer. So that influenced me as a writer. His works influenced me as a writer. Plato's Republic, like reading philosophy, like became kind of a thing for me, because for one, it was challenging to me, but also it just caused me to step back and think about the world through a different lens, and challenge myself based on my findings in that, space. And I also read a lot of political science and world history and world culture. And so those things started helping me really understand the war on drugs. It started helping me understand mass incarceration, why things were, the way that they were. Why when I look out on the cell block, the majority of the guys in there look like me. They're black and they're brown. They're coming from inner city communities. And
all the guards are white, though.
Primarily white. I mean, I've been around at some joints that had black guards, but most of the up north joints were definitely primarily white.
And you're getting a head full of political science and justice, right? So this is actually, getting you in trouble in the short run, right? This is what's leading to some of these skirmishes with the guards.
Yeah, I mean, anybody that seeks to organize inside a prison, whether it's a study group, I got in a lot of trouble. And I got some things I didn't get in trouble for that I was proud of, because I think we utilized our resources to combat issues that we thought were unjust. So.
So you're in solitary confinement. You don't know how long you're going to be in there. You're able to read. You're able to journal. You're, sort of holding on to these letters that you're receiving. But what is the, sort of strategy for just getting through it on a moment-to-moment, hour by hour basis of weathering, the emotional punishment that comes with that kind of experience?
Well, you just hit it. It's moment by moment. What I realized about trauma and hardship and adversity is, if you can just get to the other side of the moment, you can make it. You can survive. But you have to get through the moment first. A lot of times we're just like focused on what happened in the past or what the future looks like. But it's really the moments where I believe the magic happens in terms of commitment to an idea or a goal or outcome. And it starts literally with like saying, I'm just going to get through this next piece as I prepare myself for these longer things, but right now I have to deal with what's present. And that's what I did.
And in terms of the longer piece, the idea, were you starting to put together a vision or an idea of, what you wanted your life to be like, what kind of man you wanted to be when eventually you were going to get out?
I started jotting down ideas. Once I started taking writing serious, I knew I wanted to be a writer. And I knew there were several different roles into that space, and I wanted to write everything. Once I discovered I could actually write, I wanted to write everything. So I started planning and saying, okay, here's the things that I want to do, and I would write them down in the journal. I'm big on writing down your ideas and your thoughts. And so I just started writing stuff down and kind of envisioning what a life could look like beyond bars. And a lot of what I wrote down has come true. So
yeah, there's no question. I mean, and then some. I would imagine you couldn't have even imagined that your life would be as big as it is today. It's quite amazing.
So in some ways, I did imagine it, though, because I think that's where success starts. That it starts with you believing that you're worthy of it. It starts with you thinking that it'll happen for you. It starts with you making a commitment, to produce the outcomes that you desire in life. And it's always interesting because we're kind of enamored with the overnight success in our country. I mean, we live in a celebrity-driven country. But the reality is no overnight success. It's just a lot of work that keeps you up overnight. But it's definitely not an overnight success. And so I believe in being very intentional about what I want in life. So I wrote those things down and I began to execute them once I got out. Yeah,
and when you're in, I would imagine you're being faced with temptation on a daily basis, or maybe temptation isn't the right word, but the sort of opportunity to get dragged into negative circumstances on the regular.
Yeah, prison doesn't stop being prison because you change, and people don't start being negative because you change. So I was always concerned about how am I going to navigate this volatile world with a positive perspective about life, And basically what I did is I just do what I tell all people to do. If you own your truth, other people will honor it. And so I made the commitment. I talked to my core group of guys and was just like, there's things that I'm no longer interested in. Like I want to live my life in this manner. And they supported it. They even supported it to the extent that whenever there was an issue, they would deal with it as opposed to...
They protect you, keep you out of it.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Have you gone back and visited some of these mentors that are still in? So
I can't go back as a visitor, but I've gone back inside to speak. So it's a whole...
That had to be emotional.
It was definitely a mixture. It was a mixture of sadness because some of my friends were there, former bunkie guys I grew up with. Seeing some of the guys who were now suffering from mental illness, and just seeing that deterioration, that was super hard. But on the other hand, it was inspiring because when I went to the first prison up north in Michigan, I went there and it was during the beginning of the Flint water crisis. And after I finished doing my talk, these guys were like, hey, we want to donate money to this crisis. And these are guys who work, for 23 cents an hour, or some who may make like $9 a month. So going in and just seeing that not only were they inspired to take a call to action, but they were also happy for me. And I talk to my guys all the time. They email me through JPay and they call me. I always have money on my phone for them to call. So
yeah, it's beautiful, man. So what happens when you get the notice that you're getting out?
Out of prison?
Yeah.
It was so surreal. Like every step of the way, I was like, they're gonna call me back and tell me it was a mistake. They're gonna revoke the parole.
Like it's another head game.
Oh yeah, definitely.
They're fucking with you or whatever.
Yeah. But I walked out of prison June 2010, June 22nd, 2010. My last day in prison was actually on my birthday. So I got out of prison the day after my birthday.
And you walk out, and it's like there's it seems like everything kind of happened in rapid succession, because that wasn't that long ago. So much has happened since then. But, what's the first thing you do? It's like, how do you start to put the pieces back together? I mean, coming out of this situation, look, the prison system is supposed to be punitive, but it's also supposed to be rehabilitative. And we know it's not, but on some level, you took responsibility for your own rehabilitation. And you walk out, I would presume on some level with a clear mind and an idea of like how you wanted to carry yourself into the world. So how do you begin to put that into practice and put those pieces together?
I mean, it has to start before you get out of prison. And for me, I knew that I couldn't wait till I got out to try to figure out what it was that I wanted to do, that I had to start putting the work in and preparing myself for life after, because I knew that it's going to be difficult finding employment, which is kind of like one of the major building blocks for starting a fresh life. And so I started my own publishing company, published my first book from prison, got sued by the Department of Corrections after I published that book.
Because
they wanted me to pay for the cost of my incarceration. And I didn't have the money to pay them, but they sued me anyway.
I don't understand. So pay for your incarceration with the proceeds of the book?
Yeah, so they thought what happened was I was going through the cover design for with a graphic designer and my business partner. And so when she sent it in, they assumed that I had got like a major book deal from a major publisher. They didn't realize that I started, co-started this company along with my partner on our own. And so just the idea that they would sue somebody who's trying to do something positive with their life was crazy to me. But
is that like a Son of Sam thing? Like you're not supposed to profit off your...
It's not a Son of Sam thing. It's a restitution for the cost of incarceration thing. So
it's not enough that they're doing this to you. Now you got to pay for it too.
Right. And so like even if you were inside and you had a family member who passed and they had, you was the beneficiary of their insurance, they can take 90% of that. And they will take 90% of it if possible. So that's what they attempted to do to me. They didn't get any money because I made sure we didn't really make any money for them to give. But that was a deep lesson for me, because I was just like, even when you're trying to do something positive, the world can conspire to stand in the way of that. And that's basically how that ended up happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then how do you move forward from that?
I mean, I was just determined. I knew that this, the fact that they were even suing me, it said something to me that they
You're
probably
doing
wasn't
something.
I'm like, I'm doing something that's, worthy of them wasting their money in the courtroom, or wasting taxpayers' money in the courtroom. But after that, I just stayed focused. I prepared myself for life after. When I got out, I didn't come out to a cheering family or whatever. I came out to my girlfriend and my son, and but I immediately started working from the day I stepped out. Like I wanted to do something different, and I'll never forget those first moments of just breathing in fresh air, even though it was the same air on the other side of the fence. Somehow it just felt fresher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how did Righting My Wrongs come together for you?
So the way that Righting My Wrongs came together is I started a mentoring program in Detroit called Live in Peace. And I wrote a companion book to that called Live in Peace, A Youth's Guide for Turning Hurt into Hope. And through that experience, I started learning about all these amazing kids who had been told that they'll never amount to anything, told that they'll end up in prison and juvenile. And I realized that I had a responsibility to them, to really tell what I call is our story, because we all grew up with different, with the same backgrounds, even though we were in different neighborhoods and different parts of the city. But, I just felt it was important to tell our truths.
Mm-hmm. And so you were able to get a major publisher behind that book.
Well, I originally self-published.
You did. Oh, and then it tracked well, and then you ended up going re-releasing it with a publishing house.
So I did a few things that allowed for me to release it mainstream publisher. One was just really having a clear vision about what I wanted to do. And then the other part was just working to make sure that the self-published book got in the right hands of people who would actually read it. And so, I did a TED Talk around that time, and that TED Talk became one of the top talks of 2014. I originally released the book in 2013, became one of the top talks, and after that, people started reaching out to me from all over the world. I did another talk shortly after that, and one of Oprah Winfrey's producers was there, and she ended up getting the book into Oprah's hands, and so Oprah read it and wanted to interview me. And so once that happened, I reached out to one of my friends, like, hey, I need an agent. All this is happening.
It just blows wide open. How did that? I mean, it's crazy how in lockstep all those things happen. I mean, that TED Talk has well over 1 million views. I don't know how many it has now, but powerful talk. But how do you even get on Ted's radar? Like, how does that even come together? You know what I mean? Like, you're coming out. I mean, it's like, look, you're coming out of prison in Detroit. Long time. You've done some writing, but like that's a leap from going to the TED stage.
Yes,
you know what I mean? Like,
right.
who's paying attention to what you're doing? Like, what angel is looking out for you?
Yeah.
It's like you had mentioned earlier. Like, sometimes when you're trying to do good, the universe will conspire to beat you down or defeat you. Conversely, sometimes the universe shows up to support you when your heart and your mind is in the right place. And you have faith and you're putting the work in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer that that's what happened is that the universe conspired to support me in my work and my effort and to see the bigger vision of it. But one of the first people who really realized that what I was doing was bigger than the spaces I was working in was the director of MIT Media Lab, Joy Ito, who actually gave me a fellowship at MIT Media Lab.
So how did that happen?
We met after some work I was doing in Detroit. I won an award for. And he talks about that in the preface of the book or the foreword of the book. But he was there to figure out how he can, he and the staff and the faculty and students could really engage communities around issues that mattered to them. And so they were coming into Detroit at a meeting, and people were kind of misleading him about what Detroit was, because Detroit has been hot for the last few years in terms of like people moving there and artists moving there and investors, et cetera, and they just were misrepresenting the facts about Detroit. And so I spoke up, and from that moment forward, he and I ended up developing just a relationship, and we organized a hackathon together in Detroit. And at the end of that hackathon, he offered me a fellowship at MIT Media Lab, and it was through that network of incredible people that I was introduced to the TED community, and TED eventually invited me to do a talk at their 30th anniversary. Right,
that's amazing. For those that don't know, MIT Media Lab, like unbelievably prestigious, organization. It's almost like a think tank for brilliant minds trying to solve the world's problems. And you're an interesting, kind of unlikely choice to be a fellow there, because most of these people are engineers or, software coders and kind of techie type people, right? But you're basically a community activist. But I like the idea of trying to understand better how you can impact communities on a grassroots level. So I can see the thinking there and the rationale. So, in your experience of working at MIT, like what came out of that? Like what kind of solutions were you brainstorming and workshopping there, and what is the result of that? Are you still involved? Are you still working?
I still work with the director indirectly now. My fellowship is over with now.
When were you there?
But I was there I actually started the fellowship in, I think, 2012, and it officially ended in 2015. It took them a while to figure out like the timeline of it, because it was new. It was something new that the director came up. He was just took over as the director there. But the interesting thing is, like, I'm actually a nerd, though. Like a lot of people don't realize that I was a lot more in tune and in touch with tech than most people would think, considering I was gone for 2 decades. But when
you had to be a quick study when you came out. I know you talk about like how being Fred Flintstone, being transported to the Jetsons age, coming out of prison.
Yeah, I mean, it was mind blowing just to see the way technology moved, the way things worked in the world. But what I learned from my experience at MIT Media Lab is that a lot of stuff is really about iteration and innovation, right? And it's like, how do you take these materials and these ideas and shape them into something that can impact the world? And what I realized is in prison, like, we were innovating to survive, and we were constantly iterating on, how do you create, things within the environment to make your stay a little bit more bearable. So I took a lot of that mindset to the lab. And so when I was able to work with other people, it was easy to just kind of realize that, okay, really we're designing through just deductive, reasoning, just like we had all these different approaches. I'm like, wow, this is what we did in prison, or this is what we did in the streets. And I realized that, we have an opportunity to show how these worlds really intersect. And so I did a couple of things at the lab that I'm really proud of. One is I started a project called the Atonement Project that used visual arts as a means to facilitate restorative justice conversations between victims of violent crime and violent, men and women who were convicted of violent offenses.
Right, like what you just spoke to earlier on about like trying to enhance the communication between victim and perpetrator.
Yeah. And the second thing I did is I did a prison hackathon at the lab where I came up with 5 design challenges based on how we survived in prison. And then I had the faculty and staff participate to see if they can come up with solutions. And they weren't able to solve any other things in the 2 hours allotted time that we had that guys in prison can solve literally within 30 seconds. So that was an interesting learning experience for me. It was a great learning experience for them, but it also helped me think about how do we, the world we live in, where we trust other people to label what's good and bad, what's salvageable versus what's rubbish, what's genius versus what's lower levels of intelligence. And so, being able to be in an environment where these amazing thinkers couldn't figure out strategies that people who aren't given credit for being thinkers can figure out was just a really humbling experience.
That's amazing. Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really cool. And just thinking about like your trajectory, one of the things you talk about is there's kind of these 3 stages that you had to go through to, repair yourself, acknowledgement, apology, and atonement, right? Sort of the 3 stages of reconciling your experience and trying to move forward. But what do you think it is? I mean, obviously, you're self-acknowledged nerd, you're literary, you love books, and that was a crucial key component for you being able to, get out and become the person you've become, and that sort of leveraged by the mentors that you had inside. But we're looking at a system in which over 2 million people are being warehoused every year, and so few are coming out with any kind of sense of rehabilitation whatsoever. So before we get into the broader talk about the systemic ills of our prison system, what do you think it is about you that allowed you to be able to do this when so many others can't?
I mean, it's a couple of things, just determination. Like, I was determined not to just become another statistic. I was determined to be an example for my son, that even when you make a poor decision that lands you in a hellish existence, that you can actually turn that thing around if you committed to it. If you make a commitment that you're willing to stick by, you can produce different outcomes. If you master your thinking, you can really attract into your life the things that you want and desire. And so there's a lot of things that were like the drivers, but then I was also literate. Like, that, to me, that's like one of the most important pieces of the puzzle, because I was able to absorb the information that my mentors were sharing with me. I was able to challenge ideas, my own ideas, and the ideas of the system itself, because I was literate enough to understand how different systems are built and what the motivation are, and I learned how to research things in the library to help me better understand it. And then it's just grace, the grace of the universe lining up with, positive thinking. Like, I can never not honor, like, the grace of the universe and supporting me in that way.
And when you think about the system as a whole, if you could, if you could change it, and I know a lot of your activism is around trying to change it, where do we begin with that? What are the changes that we need to make right away, and what are some of the long-term changes that need to get implemented to start to, reverse this train that we're on?
I used to have this thought, I had a lot of optimism when President Obama was in office that we can get a lot of the reform bills passed. And I mean, we done a lot of amazing work. When I first started working with an organization called Cut 50 through Dream Corps, it's not Cut 50 through Dream Corps, but Dream Corps is the umbrella organization that housed an initiative called Cut 50. We curated the largest summit on criminal justice reform in this country. And that when we did that, it was just amazing to see that both parties were willing to work together on this key issue. We literally was working hand in hand with Newt Gingrich and Koch Industries and all these people who
on the other side of the
aisle that people wouldn't even think would be as progressive as they were. And I realized that actually the right party was a lot more aggressive on these issues than anybody else, than the left was. But President Obama, the way that he, utilized his platform to address the issue and, kind of share things that, really mattered to us, like that was, powerful. So it gave me a lot of optimism. In terms of where we're at today, I'm not so sure because the current head of office doesn't inspire me to believe that he'll think human interests over money interests first.
Well, hopefully over the years, that pendulum will start to swing back in the other direction.
Yeah, I mean, in the meantime, we just have to keep fighting. I think there's something that everybody can do, and that's the other part. Is like we can't always wait for politicians to fix it. We have to think about what kind of policies we want passed through. How do we want those policies handed down? That's very important. But we also got to think about what kind of men and women we want returning to society, and what is our role in ensuring that they're getting the resources that are necessary to prepare them for life after prison.
Yeah, I think the number is something like 630,000 or something like that are being released annually. So, these people that we're warehousing, they're coming back, right? So what kind of people are we welcoming back into our communities, and how prepared or equipped are we to make sure that they can, not only get on their feet, but become productive members of society? And right now we don't have much to offer in that regard, do we?
Yeah, I mean, prison in America is big business.
Yeah,
so
and more privatized.
Yeah, so there's the private prisons with, the exploitive nature of everything associated with it. Like there's a profit motive to keep people incarcerated. And, there's a film called 13th that I really encourage, viewers to go check out.
Incredible movie.
Because what Ava did, Ava DuVernay, who's the brilliant producer of that film, producing director of that film, what she did is she showed the connection between the 13th Amendment, which was the amendment that was supposed to have freed men and women who were enslaved in America. And when you watch that, you realize that there's all these different connections that we don't just normally make. The contribution that Alex makes to her policy changes, just the way that the laws are written to impact disadvantaged people. The discrepancy between powder cocaine and crack cocaine and ridiculous drug laws. So it's stuff like that I think that the more we have conversation around, the more easier it is for us to see a world where big business doesn't dictate justice.
And the extent to which so many people are either that are incarcerated are either mentally ill or have substance abuse problems, and these things need to be decoupled from other varieties of crime and treated in a different way, in a rehabilitative way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big advocate of ending the use of long-term solitary confinement, largely based on my experience of seeing what happens to men who have mental illness. who actually make up the majority of people in solitary confinement. And I just think it's a form of torture. I think it's something that we don't talk about. I think mental illness is something that we're not even comfortable talking about it just in general, let alone as it relates to somebody incarcerated. So if we can decriminalize mental illness, make sure that when men and women are incarcerated, they're getting the tools that they need to prepare for life after, decriminalize most of the drugs. I just think it's ridiculous that adults can't do what they want to do with their bodies. They're adults. I mean, you know, people drink alcohol every day, smoke cigars and cigarettes, and that's been decriminalized. So I think we just decriminalize a lot of the drugs, but also to ensure that men and women who are affiliated with that get the treatment they need while they're in the substance abuse treatment, whatever treatment is going to provide them with the best opportunity to succeed is something that I think we should be thinking about.
And it seems like it would be pretty easy to start to integrate that into these systems. I mean, it costs money, but, you know, it's so obvious.
But, you know, the interesting thing is that, you know, we think about the cost, right? It costs way more to incarcerate somebody than to educate them. And so if we can reshift our focus toward education, toward, you know, providing people with the real skill sets and tools that they need, I think it'll be dramatically different outcome.
Yeah. We got to start winding this down because I know you got another meeting, but I can't let you go without asking you a couple last questions. The first is, how do you now, when you think back on, you know, the act that got you incarcerated, you know, what is your perspective on you know, that individual's life, and how do you think about that in the context of, you know, acknowledgement, apology, and atonement?
You know, when I think about David's life, I definitely have a deeper perspective than I had 26 years ago. I know that David was a loving husband, a father of, you know, I think 3 children, and that he sounds like just a cool guy. Like, he really meant a lot to a lot of people. And that emboldens my work. You know, I do a lot of work with inner city kids that's, you know, growing up in environments where gun violence is prevalent, and knowing who, you know, whose life I'm responsible for taking, and knowing that there's a opportunity for me to do the type of work that his life won't be in vain, and that people can learn from our journey, learn from our story, learn what it means to be empathetic and compassionate toward other people, learn how to resolve conflict without gun violence or physical violence or of any sort whenever possible. Like, that's the legacy, you know, is that our story has helped change a lot of lives, you know, and it's helped people rethink gun violence as the quickest reaction to anger, you know, so that's what I think about the most.
You've been able to overcome unspeakable circumstances to, you know, be sitting here today, to take the stage at TED, to speak at the Milken conference, to, you know, spend, you know, do a 3-hour interview with Oprah and have her, you know, spread your message across the world in only the way that she can do. And, you know, it's incredible, the arc of your life. And it speaks to, you know, the power of the individual to overcome whatever circumstances. But if someone's listening to this and they find themselves in a rut, you know, maybe they're not in prison, but they're in a prison of their own self-creation or of their mind or of their emotions, and they're trying to claw their way out or figure a way out. Like, what can you sort of impart and leave people with as we wrap this up?
I mean, the thing I would say is that the absolute worst prison is the one we erect in our own minds. And we live in a culture that's constantly trying to lock us into unhealthy ideas about who we are, what we're capable of, who we aren't. And I think that the more we mentally free ourselves, individually, the more work we can do collectively. People try to say that I'm an anomaly or that, it's, I'm a rarity, but in reality, I know a lot of incredible men and women who have got out of prison. Now, they may have not have done Oprah, but it doesn't mean that what they do doesn't have the same value, the same level of contribution that they make to our community. That's any of us can do that. We all have a responsibility to do it. Like we have to learn how to wrap our arms around our brothers and sisters. We have to have those conversations that are uncomfortable. We have to really think about how our actions impact other people. And so that's what I would say.
Mm-hmm. That's a good place to end it, man.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it, Shaka. If you're inspired by Shaka, which I'm sure you are, he's an easy guy to find on the internet, Shaka Segura, pretty much everywhere you look. Yeah. I'll link up your Oprah interview and your TED Talk and a whole bunch of other stuff about you in the show notes here for people that want to take it deeper. And much love, man. You're inspiring, and I wish you well, and only want wind in your sails as you spread your message, man. You're doing amazing things, and it's a privilege to talk to you.
Yeah. Well, I'm honored to be here. Thank you for taking the time out to read Righting My Wrongs, and for the listeners, that's Writing with a W.
That's right.
Get a chance to check that out. Share your thoughts. I'm very accessible on social media. I respond to all of my own social media, so tweet at me, Shaka Segura, and let me know what you thought of the interview. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them via social media, and we'll respond.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for having me.
Peace. Lights. All right, we did it. What do you guys think? I told you it was heavy, right? It's pretty intense, but I think it's also uplifting. It's quite a powerful parable for the power of the human spirit to transcend and to really channel pain and trauma and turn it into something that can be of benefit to many people in a really, truly inspiring way. And so I applaud Shaka for the journey that he has undertaken and the work that he continues to do. You can learn more about Shaka at shakasengor.com. It's SHAKASENGHOR. And definitely check out his book, Righting My Wrongs. It's an incredible read. You will not be disappointed. As always, please make a point of checking out the show notes on the episode page at richroll.com for this. I got tons of links, including his TED Talk and all kinds of other cool stuff. A couple articles about his new media company that I think you guys are going to enjoy exploring. Also, I want to tell you guys about our new meal planner. I'm so proud of this service. It's really amazing and extraordinary. Essentially, when you sign up, you get access to thousands of plant-based recipes, unlimited meal plans, and grocery lists. Everything is totally personalized and customized based on your goals and your food preferences and your allergies and your time constraints. We even have grocery delivery in 22 metropolitan areas and growing, and 24/7 customer support from a team of experts. It's really quite something. I have to tell you, I'm really proud of it. We're getting amazing feedback from the people that are using it. I love all the Instagrams that people are sharing from the recipes. So essentially, if you're stuck, if you want to start eating healthy, if you want to start incorporating more plant-based dishes into your daily life, or perhaps you're even a long-time plant-based or vegan person, but you've just run out of inspiration and you already have all the cookbooks, this is exactly what you've been looking for. And the greatest thing about it is that it's so affordable, just $1.90 a week. And I just love that because it's so democratic, essentially the price of a cup of coffee every week, and access to all of this incredible information. So I stand behind it 110%. I'm just so proud of this. If you haven't checked it out yet, please go to meals.richroll.com or just click on Meal Planner on my website on richroll.com and have a look. Also, I want to mention that Plant Power Ireland is quickly approaching. We still have a few spots left, July 24 through 31. We are all going to be descending on this incredible manor on 90 acres in County Cork. It's called Ballyvaughan. It's really beautiful. Julie and I scoped it out last year. It's just, I'm so excited. And essentially this experience is 7 days of transformation. We're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to do all kinds of cool stuff that I think you guys are going to enjoy, but it's also going to be work. It's intended to really transform your life. So we're going to cook, we're going to eat, we're going to run, we're going to meditate, we're going to do tea ceremony. We're going to have really intense workshops around everything from creativity to relationships to business to nutrition. We're going to have Ayurvedic treatments. It's going to be something else. I got to tell you guys, we've done 2 of these trips to date. Both of them were in England. This is our first time going to Ireland. And we've built a really beautiful community out of this. Everybody who has attended our past events have stayed connected through Facebook. They even visit each other. And it's a really beautiful thing. So if this sounds like something that would interest you, go to ourplantpowerworld.com for information, and you can find out and sign up and do all that kind of stuff there. Also, I send an email out every week. It's called Roll Call. It's essentially 5 or 6 things that I've come across over the course of the week, usually articles I've read, documentaries I've watched, videos I've looked at, a new product, no gimmicks, I'm not trying to sell you anything. There's no affiliate links in this. It's just good quality, solid content. So if you would like to receive that, it goes out every Thursday. You can subscribe by going to richroll.com/subscribe or just entering your email address in any of those little windows that you find on my website. And when you're on my site, we also have signed copies of Finding Ultra and The Plant Power Way and This Cheese is Nuts. We got t-shirts, we got tech tees, we got all kinds of cool swag and merch to meet your plant power needs. So check that out. If you would like to support this show and my work, there's a couple ways to do it. Share it with your friends and on social media. That's easy. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe. Perhaps that's the most powerful, potent, and important one. Click that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts or on whatever platform you enjoy your podcast content. And we also have a Patreon for those who want to support my work financially. And thank you so much to everybody who has done that. I want to thank everybody who has helped put on the show today. Jason Camiolo for audio engineering and production and show notes and helping me with the ad copy and the scripts and the WordPress page. He's doing a lot. You're doing a great job, Jason. Thank you. Sean Patterson, he designs all the graphics, the graphic assets that I use on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter for the show. Thank you so much, Sean. And theme music, as always, by Anna Lemma. So I think if you take one thing away from this show today, it is the power of forgiveness, and it's about living in gratitude and service. I think probably most people who are listening to this show have not had to suffer through the circumstances that Shaka has endured. And if he can meet that challenge and overcome it and transform his life in as dramatic fashion as he has, I think it is inspirational for all of us to understand that we all have that inherent power within ourselves to take that next step to improve our lives and to give of ourselves in service to others. So perhaps meditate on that, and I will see you guys back here in a couple days. Thanks for the love. Peace. Plants.